Just so everyone knows, this is being recorded tonight, so we will be able to post it, so it will be able to be reviewed later. Again, we'll get that information out through the city once it's available. So if you're here for the draft air quality permit for Sanimax, you're in the right place. If you're not here for that, thank you for coming anyways. We'll have a fun night and go through some of this information here. So my name is David Saski, and I'm with the MPCA. I'm a community affairs specialist. We've got three of us that are going to be speaking tonight. Miles Bergeson, he is our air permit engineer, and Dick Cordes is an air permit supervisor, and we've got Corey Beck, who is here from compliance and enforcement. So we're gonna, we'll work through this presentation tonight. It's probably about 25 minutes. And then, always never fails. We test it and it works, and then it's. All right. Let's try this one. There we go. Okay, so the arrows may not be working. All right. So about 25-minute presentation, and then following that, we'll do a question and answer period, and we'll take any questions you have. When we get to that time and you're doing the question and answer, if you have a question, we'd ask that you come up to the microphone if you're comfortable doing that. That is so that it can be recorded, so it can be heard. Otherwise, we'll repeat the question and just so that it can be heard. So, quick agenda through our presentation tonight. I'll talk about why we're here, the air permitting process in general, and then we'll talk about the Sanimax draft permit overview. And then we'll talk about public commenting and how you can make effective public comments and what we do with those comments. And then we'll move into that question and answer period. So why we're here, we're working to more effectively inform communities when permit actions occur and to provide more opportunity for engagement, particularly in areas of environmental justice concern. And so the graph on the right, in the orange, is the percentage of Minnesota residents who live with air pollution in excess of risk guidelines. So the statewide average is 36%. The low income population is 53%, and then indigenous communities and people of color is 78%. So those are some numbers that are statewide. So the MPCA is committed to environmental justice, meaning the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people concerning the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. We've actually hired an entire group of people to assist that and further that movement. So we want to be in the community giving these types of presentations on different permits that are coming up more frequently and getting more community input as much as we can. So tonight we're here to provide information, answer questions regarding the proposed air permit for Sanimax, and to talk about the open comment period. So that's why we're here tonight. So what we'll start with is we'll have Miles come up, and he is going to give us an overview on the air permitting in general, not specific to Sanimax. So that's where we'll start, so you can get just that basic understanding. So the side arrows are working now.
The MPCA issues all air quality permits in Minnesota, except for the permits for facilities located on tribal lands. However, only 21% of air pollution in the state is subject to and regulated by air permits. The remaining sources of air pollution are addressed by other parts of the MPCA or the U.S. EPA. The MPCA issues both federal operating permits, which are required under the Clean Air Act, and state operating permits, which are required under Minnesota state statutes. Of the nearly 2,000 sources in the state of Minnesota with an air permit, 237 of these sources have federal individual operating permits, where they are permitted to have emissions at or above the threshold requiring a federal permit. Individual operating permits are generally much longer permits that include customized permit requirements for each source. The remaining 1,734 sources have state permits. Of those, 120 sources have state individual operating permits. These facilities have emissions greater than state thresholds, but below the federal thresholds. Some facilities are naturally below federal thresholds, while other facilities have permit conditions that limit their emissions below the federal thresholds. These state individual operating permits look a lot like federal individual operating permits. They're just for facilities with less potential emissions. For reference, Sanimax has a state individual operating permit. My apologies. There we go. The remaining 1,614 sources either have a registration permit or a capped permit. These permits are significantly different than the federal and state individual operating permits and are only for very small sources with low emissions, below certain thresholds. These are one-page permits that refer to a section of the rules and require operation in compliance with those rules. Construction permits or permit amendments may be required if a permittee holds an individual operating permit and they need to make a change at their facility that requires a change to their individual operating permit. The MPCA has a combined permit program, meaning that one permit covers both the operation of a facility and all construction at a facility. Whether a proposed change qualifies as a major, minor, or moderate amendment depends on what is being changed in the permit and how the facility's emissions increase as a result of that change. A major amendment allows for more significant changes to the permit, but it is also subject to stricter requirements such as a required public comment period and construction starting only after a permit is issued. Administrative amendments are only for making administrative changes to a facility's permit, such as making a name change, ownership change, extension to certain deadlines, and correcting errors. Insignificant modifications are allowed at a facility if the emissions resulting from a proposed change are below the insignificant modification threshold. Facilities are allowed to make changes that qualify as insignificant modifications without the issuance of a permit amendment. However, these changes are incorporated into the next permit action. The MPCA tailors each individual air permit to each unique facility. An air permit lists the emission sources and all equipment at the facility related to these emission sources, such as pollution control devices, stacks, and monitors. It also includes requirements and limits that apply to the equipment at the facility and clearly describes what the facility must do to show compliance with these limits and requirements. Through these limits and requirements, individual air permits serve as a tool for the permittee, the regulators, and the public to show accountability. Individual air permits also serve as a compliance tool by describing the record-keeping, performance tests, and operating parameters that the facility must follow to comply with air quality regulations. Air permits are one tool that we have to limit pollution, protect the environment, and protect human health. If you are reviewing a draft air quality permit and related documents to prepare to comment, it is important to focus your review on items within the jurisdiction of the MPCA's air permitting authority. The MPCA cannot address all important issues through air permits. Some issues that are outside the MPCA's air permitting jurisdiction include land use or zoning concerns, non-air environmental impacts such as water, solid waste, and hazardous waste concerns. These are regulated by other air permits or other permits. Air emissions from mobile sources, even a facility's own fleet of trucks, are not usually covered by their air permit. The only emissions generated by mobile sources that may be regulated through an air permit are the dust emissions created by the tires of the vehicles on the facility's property. Indoor air pollution. A facility's air permit only regulates emissions to outdoor air, not indoor air, and odor. There are state standards that apply to hydrogen sulfide emissions, a common cause of odor complaints, and there are air permit limits and health benchmarks for many pollutants that have odors, but there are currently no regulations specifically for odors that can be addressed through air permits. However, a regulation that will require facilities to submit an odor management plan is currently being developed by the MPCA. It will only apply to counties in and surrounding the metro area. If an odor is coming from a company or a facility, the MPCA, city, and/or county officials can check to ensure that the facility is complying with state and local rules and permits. To submit a complaint, call MPCA's Air Quality Complaint Line or use our online complaint form. And last, we have a quick overview of the air permitting process itself. Every permit action starts with the permittee or the facility when they prepare and submit a permit application to the MPCA. After the MPCA reviews the permit application, air permitting staff complete a comprehensive technical and regulatory review of the application. We make sure the permit is up to date with current regulations and consider any changes the facility may want to make as outlined in their application. When we draft a permit, we include limits and other requirements based on that review. If we don't think a facility can comply with those requirements, we do not put a draft permit on notice. We cannot issue a permit if we don't think the permittee can comply. After the MPCA review and permit drafting, the public review and comment period begins. Public participation is built into the Clean Air Act, the federal statute where our current permitting program comes from. The public notice process makes sure citizens can comment on a draft permit. We also send the draft permit to the EPA for their review. For state permits, this takes place at the same time as the 30-day public review and comment period. The EPA may also submit comments on the draft permit during the review period. Following the public and EPA review and comment periods, the MPCA reviews and responds to all public comments received, as well as any comments received from the EPA. Based on the comments received, changes to the permit may be made. If the permit requires no significant changes, the MPCA may decide to issue the permit. If significant changes to the permit occur after public notice, an additional public review and comment period is held. And just for future reference, you don't have to wait until public notice to contact the MPCA with any concerns that you might have. You can contact the MPCA at any point in the permitting process, and it's helpful to know your concerns before we reach public notice. You can call the main MPCA phone number to submit any concerns about a permit or a facility at any time. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, you can submit formal complaints to the MPCA at any time as well. Now I'll hand it over to Dick for an additional slide.
As David indicated, I'm Dick Cordes. I am a supervisor in the air quality permit section. While we were doing our facility review, our review of the permit, we identified an additional limitation that was needed. And we plan to make a change to the permit so that the company will no longer be able to use a fuel that it has previously been allowed to use. This will reduce the overall emissions that the facility could emit. Sanimax will instead need to use other cleaner fuels, and this will help protect the air quality in and around South St. Paul. We will make the change to the permit in the coming weeks. However, our permitting rules require us to make that change available to you during a public comment period. So there's a comment period that's currently open that ends on February 14th. We will start a second public comment period after that, probably in late February or early March. And we wanted to let you know about this so you're not surprised when there is a second public comment period, and that you understand the reason that we're having a second public comment period. So back to you, Miles.
Thanks. I'll give a quick overview of Sanimax and their draft permit that is on public notice now. Sanimax is a rendering facility located at 505 Hardman Avenue in South St. Paul. Sanimax recycles animal, vegetable, and food processing residues at its facility. The facility's main processes are cookers, boilers, dryers, and milling equipment. And the facility holds an individual state operating permit, and this permit action is a major amendment to their individual state operating permit. The draft air permit currently authorizes the following changes: the replacement of an existing continuous cooker with a new unit that has a higher processing capacity. The new continuous cooker is labeled as Equi 78 in the draft permit. the increase of existing limits for particulate matter emissions from the continuous cookers group to account for the increased potential emissions from the new continuous cooker operating at its full capacity. Sanimax has submitted modeling with this permit application that demonstrates compliance with the national and state ambient air quality standards. They are meeting all federal and state regulatory standards, even with this increase in particulate matter emissions. The draft permit also includes the incorporation of a replacement that qualified as an insignificant modification, where existing milling equipment was replaced with more efficient milling equipment. The new milling equipment is labeled as EQUI 77 in the draft permit. And the draft permit also includes the addition of new requirements for a newly constructed scrubber labeled as TRIO 36 in the draft permit to address odor concerns at the facility. I'll discuss this new scrubber in more detail in a later slide. I also want to note that Sanimax has requested permission to replace the old continuous cooker with the new continuous cooker before the issuance of this permit because the old cooker had suffered a failure. The request was reviewed and approved through a schedule of compliance agreement under the conditions that they do not operate the new cooker at its full capacity until the permit is issued, and they install a new scrubber to control odor emissions, among other requirements. The draft permit, once issued, will formally authorize this replacement and allow the facility to run the new continuous cooker at its full capacity. Here's a graphic to illustrate where the new pieces of equipment fit into the continuous cookers and milling process at Sanimax. The new milling equipment, you can see at top and center labeled EQUI 77, sends its emissions to the existing particulate matter capture unit, which controls the particulate matter emissions from the milling process before sending the treated exhaust to the existing stack. Meanwhile, the existing continuous cooker and the new continuous cooker sends their emissions to the new nitrogen-based odor control scrubber. The emissions then pass through the existing sulfur-based odor control scrubber. Finally, the emissions are sent to the particulate matter control scrubber before finally venting the treated exhaust to the same existing stack. On this slide, you can see the potential emissions increased authorized with this amendment in the top table, as well as the total facility's limited potential emissions and actual reported emissions in the bottom table. The replacement of the continuous cooker results in an increase in particulate matter and volatile organic compounds, or VOC, potential emissions because of the increased process capacity of the new cooker compared to the old unit. The replacement of the milling equipment resulted in a reduction of potential emissions from the milling process because of the higher efficiency of the new equipment. That reduction in emissions is not taken into account in the top table, but it is reflected in the bottom table. Removing the additional fuel that Dick had mentioned as an allowable fuel for the facility's two boilers further reduces the facility's potential emissions. This change is reflected in the bottom table as well. Note that potential emissions are calculated assuming a facility runs their equipment constantly, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and represent the worst-case facility emissions that a facility can emit. Limited potential emissions consider the permit-required control equipment used at the facility to control emissions and any permit-enforceable limits at the facility, but it still assumes that the equipment is running constantly. Since equipment rarely runs constantly at a given facility, the potential emissions give an upper limit of pollution that the equipment is capable of emitting, which is frequently much higher than what the facility actually emits. You can see that the total facility actual emissions that were reported in 2023 were significantly less than the facility's total limited potential emissions. On the slide, I have a visual representation of Sanimax's limited potential emissions, represented by the blue columns on the left, compared to the reported actual emissions, represented by the orange columns on the right. The pollutants shown here, from left to right, are particulate matter with a diameter of 10 microns or less, or PM10, particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 microns or less, or PM2.5, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and lead. you can see that Sanimax's reported emissions are significantly less than their limited potential emissions. As I mentioned in the last slide, this is because the limited potential emissions assume the worst-case operation at the facility. The MPCA uses a facility's potential emissions to check what state and federal regulations apply and to ensure that the ambient air quality standards are not being violated even at worst-case possible operation. Sanimax is in compliance with the state and federal ambient air quality standards and all state and federal regulations, even at worst-case operation. As I mentioned earlier, the draft permit also includes requirements for a newly installed scrubber to address odor concerns at the facility. The installation and operation of the scrubber was required by a schedule of compliance agreement between the MPCA and Sanimax. Because of this schedule of compliance agreement, the MPCA can include the following requirements in this permit. Requirements to vent emissions from the 2 continuous cookers to the new odor scrubber whenever one or both continuous cookers are operating. Requirements to operate and maintain the scrubber whenever emissions are being vented to the scrubber. Operational limits on the scrubber, such as liquid flow rate and allowable pressure drop range. Requirements to install and maintain flow rate and pressure drop monitoring equipment. Daily record-keeping requirements to record liquid flow rate and pressure drop. Corrective actions to take whenever liquid flow rate or pressure drop readings are outside of operational limits, and requirements to conduct periodic inspections of the control equipment. As I mentioned earlier, the MPCA does not currently have the authority to include a control efficiency limit or other limitations on odor itself in this permit action. Next, David will talk in more detail about effective permit comments.
Thanks, Miles. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about effective public comments and how you can make comments to the MPCA. So the slide that you see here, this is a QR code, and then there's some link information at the bottom. This will take you to our website that will allow you to select Sanimax as an opportunity to make your public comments. If you don't grab this right now, at the end of the meeting, I'll come back and I'll put this back up there so that you can grab that information again. So the materials that are on notice is the draft air quality permit. That is what is actually on notice. So online, when you go to that site, you will see that the permit is there. What you're also going to find there is the public notice summary, which is supplementary information pertinent to that proposed permit, and then a technical support document, which is also supplementary information. So the public notice summary, what that contains is the dates of the first public notice period. And so the first one, like Dick said, that one ends February 14th. The second public notice period will likely come toward the end of February, right in the beginning of March, right in that time frame. So that will be a new set of 30-day period for making additional comments. So the contact information will also be on that site, which will be from Miles. And then there'll be instructions on how to make your comments, a brief description of the facility, which you just heard, and what the permit changes for. So you'll see all the same information. And then a summary table of the emissions increase will be on there. So tips for making effective comments. Tell the agency who you are and what your interest is in the permit. So if you represent a certain community group, or certain organization, let us know who you're with so that we know how that reflects what your interest is in the permit. And then offer specific criticisms of the permit. So if there's a particular portion of that permit related to, say, for example, emissions, tell us what your criticism is of that portion in the permit. If you offer criticisms of a facility's operation, be sure to provide details to support your points. An example would be, if you're, in this case, if you're observing something at certain times of the day. So we want those examples. Offer alternatives to items that you don't agree with. As much as we like to think that we think of everything, you may have an alternative that we just simply haven't thought of. And so we want you to offer those suggestions to us so that we can take that information and consider it. And then discuss other sources in the area. If there's things that you're concerned with that would relate to this, let us know that also. And then provide your contact information. The reason we ask for your contact information is if you provide information to us that we really sit back and go, we would like to get a little bit more information or some more details from you about it. It's something that we're interested in. We really would like to have a way to contact you. If you are wanting to make an anonymous comment, then what we would ask you to do is mail that comment in. That can come in anonymously. If a comment comes in anonymously, then that comment is not able to be responded to directly back. It would still be responded to through our response process, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then carbon copy anyone that you think should see the comments. So what do the MPCA staff do with your comments? So every single comment is read, and every concern is evaluated. So every comment becomes a part of the permit record. And so in this case, it's going to be for both comment periods. So the first one, those will be pulled in, and then the second one will be pulled in. There will be a formal response, either individual or by topic. So an example is, say we have 30 comments, and 5 of those comments are the same question. There'll be one response to all 5 of those questions. So you'll be able to see which responses go to which questions. It's very clearly defined, but they all will be responded to. And then comments may or may not result in permit revisions. So an example would be what Miles was talking about before, is if you're making a comment that is regarding, an example would be, well, we think they should just move to another location. That's not within the MPCA's authority. So that would be a zoning restriction. So that's not something that we can take action on. So again, that comes back to, we want you to focus on what this permit is. That's what we want to see the comments on. Those are actionable things that we can look at. Another side note on that is that it's not about the number of comments. So if we get 50 comments that tell us to look at one thing, that's not going to be 50 responses or 50 times we're going to look at that. That's all combined as one, okay? We might get 50 on one that would be outside of our authority that we can't act on, but we might only get one that we can act on. So we will act on the one that we can. And then we use that time also for fixing errors and gaps in the draft permit. And then again, all comments and responses are included in the technical support document after the close of it. And then certain permit changes can potentially require renoticing the permit, which is what Dick talked about before. That's why we're going to have a renoticing of this second period, is because we found that other area that is a significant change, so that has to be renoticed. So the next steps where we're at right now is that the proposed permit containing the updated limitations, that's going to be drafted. Those will be the additional limitations that Dick talked about. And then the second open comment period will be announced, and the proposed permit will be placed on notice again. So that link that I'll put back up there, that will take you back to the same location when the second one is available. So you'll be able to get back to it and make additional comments. And then we will be scheduling a second public meeting during that time period. We don't have that date worked out yet, but we will get that out. I will work with the city to make sure that that information is put back on the city website. It will also be on Sanimax's site, and then, of course, it'll be on the MPCA site. So we'll put all that information out there. So I want to take a quick opportunity to also address odor rulemaking, because you've heard that term a couple times. During 2025, right now there is not an odor rule in the state of Minnesota. Throughout the course of 2025, we're going to be moving into that odor rulemaking, where we will have that, that process in place. That rulemaking process involves a lot of community engagement. That is your opportunity as a community to work with the MPCA and tell us what your concerns are, what you want to see in an odor rule. And that is going to be in the metro county areas where that is going to be impacted. So what I would say is it can be a lengthy process, but we would encourage you to sign up at this site. That will give you the information every time we're going to have a meeting or anything new that is coming about with odor rulemaking. So I would really encourage you to sign up for that. If you're here, I'm going to assume that you're interested in odor and air permitting, and this is your opportunity, a longer opportunity and more engaging opportunity with the MPCA. So we really would like to have you involved in that process. So This comes to the end of the actual presentation, and then I will say we'll move into a question and answer period where myself and Miles and Dick will try to answer any questions you have. Anything that we can't answer tonight, we will take back. We'll get that information and then we'll get back with you on it. So I don't want to. We're not going to stand up here and tell you we can't answer that unless we just don't know, and then we'll find out that answer for you and we'll get back with you. I also want to say that Sanimax, they did provide us with a flyer that has a QR code to their site, and that is on the back table, and it's South St. Paul webpage to learn more about the Sanimax facility updates, odor improvement plans, and their upcoming public meeting on February 20th that Sanimax will be holding. So grab one of these on your way out. That'll have that information on it. So I think we're ready to take some questions. You ready? All right. So during the questions, because this is recorded, like I said, if you have questions, there's a microphone up here, or we can just repeat the question. We just want to make sure that people watching this later have an opportunity to hear the question and then along with the answer. So, all right. Any questions? Who wants to be first?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Can you just put the slide back up that had the map and the circle on it?
Certainly.
And I just didn't quite catch what the circle was supposed to be representing.
Yeah. And we can go back to any slide
Yeah.
through questions here if there's something particularly that you want to see.
I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
So what is this supposed to be telling me?
So the center point on this map is the location of Sanimax. And then when we talk about our environmental justice areas, we talk about the immediate areas and then an area within a 1 mile distance of what is considered an environmental justice area. So this map covers what would fall in that environmental justice area.
So does that, this is probably a question that should be on camera or on recording. So does that mean you don't think the particulates go further than a mile? When you do a 1 mile radius, and this is how your justice measurement is, or?
I'm going to step aside because I am not the scientist.
Okay, so you're asking a question if the 1 mile radius represents the extent of our concern about particulate matter. No, that our concern with particulate matter goes beyond that.
Okay.
What in the case of Sanimax, they were required to model for particulate, and they're required to model at a distance that there's a concept in permitting that's a small amount of relatively small amount of impact from a modeled perspective, and we model out to that area. And I'm not sure what it was in this how far it went out. Do you know, Tony?
I would say the initial modeling goes out 50 kilometers.
Yeah.
And then that is trimmed down based on the increase. But the modeling domain goes out 50 kilometers.
And other sources would be pulled into that modeling as well, that were identified with modeling methodologies that I'm not all that clear on.
So what I'll add with that is that in the beginning, I talked about the MPCA is working to increase our engagement in all of our permitting, but we are also more focused in environmental justice areas. So this map speaks to specifically that distance that would be within an environmental justice area. So it is still part of the overall process, but it is something that the MPCA is considering as an environmental justice concern. Did that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
This is about environmental justice, it's
Yes.
not about particulates.
Correct, yeah. All right.
And maybe you covered this, but there's supposed to be a stationary air monitoring equipment placed in Newport sometime from appropriation we provided last year. Do you know when that's going to be installed?
So the question is if there's going to be a stationary air monitor installed in Newport and when that's going to be installed.
We don't have the people here who know that. I don't think we have the people here who have that information.
But can you get that information to us?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we will certainly,
Emails that when we signed up?
yes, we will certainly get that information.
Hi, I'm Joe Kalazeski. Are the particulates dangerous that fall on the populace?
I think the question you're asking is, are the constituents that make up, that are emitted from the facility, do they have particulate, or do they have significant harm in and of themselves, or is it, so there's a couple of concerns. One is size. So PM2.5 is very fine, and it's, when you breathe it into your lungs, it negatively affects.
So it's the particulate, not the content of the particulate.
It can be both.
Okay.
But in the way that we're looking at it as PM2.5, we're concerned about the size of the particulate as opposed to how the constituent itself.
Thank you. Now I have another question. Is the odor considered hazardous? I know it's one of odors in this town, but is the odor hazardous to us?
I would respond in much the same way as I responded on the particulate. There are odors that can be hazardous to you, but you can have compounds that are odorous that are not hazardous. And I don't know enough about the specific ones that are coming out of Sanimax to let you know where they are.
Well, it's a smell all unto itself, but we have many smells in South St. Paul. Those are the two things that I had concerns about. Thank you.
Thank you. The others? Yeah.
Could you go back to the slide with the boxes of how it moves through the process that Sanimax uses?
Yes. Had to think about which one you were,
Yeah, that one.
this one, okay. So the yellow ones are the new pieces of equipment.
Does the milling create an odor, or does it only come from the cookers?
So the question is, does the milling create an odor, or does it only come from the cookers?
Good question. The continuous cookers have been identified as at least the main source of odors, and that's why the schedule of compliance had them installed at that point.
The others?
To me, it seems like this diagram shows that odor and particulates are separate, in a separate part of the process, and are treated by different machines. Is that true?
I definitely see what you're saying. Since there is no odor control on the milling equipment, it does send to its own particulate matter capture unit. That's the TRIA 29. The continuous cookers do emit particulate matter emissions as well. They have the PM control scrubber, which is TRIA 28. I think I answered your question. Please ask another if I didn't.
characterize the emissions?
So the question is, will we chemically characterize the emissions?
I'll try to answer your question. Certain pollutants are identified by their chemical species, like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide and lead. Those are chemical constituents. In specific, like for particulate, we don't generally dive down and figure out what makes up the PM 2.5 or PM 10 for the purposes of when we're generally doing permits. Am I getting to your question?
No.
How can we clarify what your question is? I want to make sure that we try to clarify what it is you're asking.
Okay, my concern is if I'm outside and the odor is so horrific, it makes me nauseous. Should I be wearing a mask when I'm outside? Is it safe to be outside when the odor is that horrific? I live in Newport. I'm concerned about my health. I walk every day, and should I not be walking? Should I be indoors?
So your question is, if there's a high odor, should you be wearing a mask for health reasons while you're out?
Or should I not even be outside? Should I be inside?
I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay, so we've had a lot of I don't know the answer to the question. Is there anybody who does know the answer to the question, and why aren't they here?
The response to your question requires an analysis of air that we don't often do. So, I mean, you're looking for speciation of chemical compounds. And that is not a common analysis that we do.
I would say that would be a good opportunity to put a comment during our open comment period. That would be a great example of a question and a comment that you could certainly put in an open comment period. And then that will be reviewed. That'll be part of the official record, and then that would be reviewed. So that is a great example of that.
So just a follow-up question is, if no one has any data on the odor, and I've lived here since '98, and the odor's been really bad for a long time, whose responsibility is it? Like, why are we just talking about that now? Not that it would be the PCA's responsibility, but would it be Sanimax's responsibility? Would it be Newport's responsibility, South St. Paul, DuPage County?
At this point, it's not for us in this meeting to designate a responsibility in that aspect. That would be another opportunity to leave a comment or a question. But in this setting, it is not for us to designate a responsibility level. Yes. 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 Yeah, these comments and / questions that we're hearing now, these are the exact type of questions and comments that we would put into place in odor rulemaking. Those would be the type of analysis that can be discussed in odor rulemaking. So although they're not in place right now, so the state doesn't have the authority to operate underneath a rule in that capacity right now, that is where we would encourage you to become involved in that process so that those exact questions can be addressed and then considered for rulemaking.
I'm Carrie Palmer, representing MPCA. I just wanted to mention with the rulemaking, in case it isn't clear, that after that odor rulemaking is done, that will give the MPCA authority to act on odor. It's
Yes.
something that we don't have in place right now, but we will have in place after the rulemaking.
In the future, we will have that authority through that rulemaking process.
Hi, my name is Matthew Thompson. So if I understand this correctly, there's going to be a new continuous cooker that has increased capacity, correct? And then the new nitrogen odor control scrubber will hopefully support this, but do we have numbers that analyze the increased capacity, this new scrubber? Is that going to be taking care of this additional capacity, then going through the sulfur odor control scrubber? Or are we just going to make the problem even worse now that there's more capacity and more particulate ending up in the air?
The addition of the new odor scrubber will kind of work with the existing one, and it should make the odor control at the facility more successful. And it also will increase the effectiveness of the PM control scrubber, because the more scrubbers you have in a row, the more effective they usually are.
I guess the question is the increased efficiency,
Yeah.
is this going to be an improvement, or is this going to just be the same? Where are we going to end up in the end? I guess that's what I was kind of looking for from the MPCA to kind of have that understanding and
Yeah.
research to explain to us.
Yep. And it is replacing an existing cooker, so it was swapped out. There is a slightly higher increased process capacity, like you said.
I think we all hope.
Yeah.
That's the
Yes,
residents'
yes, yeah.
concerns.
Thank you,
This
yeah.
is what we're concerned about.
And as
Yeah.
was mentioned previous, so when we did the scheduled compliance with the facility to allow for the scrubber to get put in, we put a requirement that the facility hold its own separate public meeting once that scrubber goes out, or goes online and becomes operational, so that you all could provide comment back to the company if it's not getting better.
This is the 3 p.m. meeting.
That'd be the time to say it.
Is there any way to measure
There was a meeting at 3 p.m. on a work day.
Yeah, so
It was impossible to attend because of my
Right.
job.
Yeah, so and we are aware of that meeting. That was the first meeting. And so as a part of that scheduled compliance, what Corey's talking about is a requirement for a second meeting. And I believe that the information, I believe that the next one is actually going to be a virtual meeting.
Would it still be within that same time frame where?
I think there were some considerations about the time frame, so that, yeah, I think there were some considerations about the time frame when we spoke with them about that.
David, can I jump in on that?
Yes.
It will be an evening meeting, so we'll have the virtual option. It will be post 6 o'clock, so probably similar to the 6:30 to 8 o'clock.
Perfect. Great, thank you.
Can you put the slide back up that had the bar graph showing the 2023 emissions versus the potential high emissions? No, it was that one.
There we go.
So, as I listen to these comments, and I see the potential emissions in blue much higher than the 2023 reported emissions, and knowing that the 2023 reported emissions created significant odor issues, which were probably caused by these chemicals, and then to say, we're going to triple, quadruple these emissions, we're going to allow that air permit to go through. I don't really understand that this is true emissions. Like, this is after a scrubber has scrubbed it out. This is what's going out. And how that is better, or how that is okay. And I'm a little concerned that you don't even know the health effects of these odors, yet you are in a rulemaking process to say, yeah, we're going to allow an air permit to do more emissions when we don't even know the health effects of these things? That's how I'm putting together these data points at the moment. Your thoughts?
Hi, I can answer a little bit at the beginning about potential emissions. The potential emissions in the blue bars, those are used, that is assuming the facility is running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and also like using worst-case fuels. We just use the potential emissions to calculate the worst case possible. It's not where the facility is at, but we use it, like the worst case, to see if they are crossing any thresholds, like would require a federal permit, or making sure that they meet the ambient air quality standards. So even at these worst case thresholds, which again, as you can see by the orange bars, is nowhere near their actual emissions, they are still in compliance with the ambient air quality standards, both.
I apologize for interrupting, but these are the emissions with a less productive cooker, right? This is with a...
No, these emissions do consider the higher, these emissions do consider the higher process capacity cooker.
So to look at the orange bars and say this is what will probably be with the new cooker, I think, well, no, the new cooker's doing more than the old cooker, correct? So then there would be more emissions just by the nature of a cooker that is producing more product.
That's correct.
Makes sense?
It wouldn't be up where the blue bars are, though.
Okay.
To piggyback off of that,
Yeah.
and I'm going to just use small numbers so my mind can understand it. If the current numbers are going out at 6, their new capacities could be going out at 8, 10, or 12 because there's more efficiency. But in theory, the new scrubbers are going to lessen the amount of stuff that's there. But because of the increased capacity, as he said, that still may put more particulates out there. Just when it's emitted, it's a smaller number, like a 3 or 4. So we could be getting more particulates out there on a given daily, yearly basis. But it's reduced based off of we got new equipment and we should be happy because if it was old equipment, we'd have 6, 7, 8s, or 10s again. So I'm struggling with that too, trying to understand if we have that increased capacity, is there going to be more particulates out just in smaller, steady doses?
We want to look at what those doses are compared to what is permit levels.
Okay, so it's difficult to predict how the facility is actually going to run into the future, right? They have a new unit that has a higher capacity. One potential outcome is that they run harder for a shorter amount of time and have the same output, which might have, fewer emissions if it's more efficient overall. Another possibility is they can take in more material and process more material. And we're not exactly sure how much more they would need to take in and process to create a higher particulate loading than what they've been doing in the past.
That makes sense to me, but how do you decide then what is the safe amount?
So what we're allowed to do in our role as a permitting authority is to look at the regulations that are in place. And what do the regulations say? And what the regulations say is that the permit that we're putting together, that's on notice right now, or the one that will be on notice in late February or early March, that meets the regulations that are out there. Now, there are other concerns that are associated with facilities. There are those concerns that Miles talked about that are things that air permits don't really address. And odor is one of them at this point. We don't have the tools to adequately address odor concerns. We don't have great authorities to address noise concerns as far as I know. I mean, we've had a lot of noise complaints. We have some tools, but they're not great tools. And so there are things that happen at facilities that are air-related, that are not governed by air quality rules, the tools that we currently have. And that's, I think, some of the frustration in the room tonight.
Yeah. That's definitely what I'm hearing, is some of the frustration with that. Again, I'll come back to the odor rulemaking, which is where we'd really like to see the community be involved with the odor rulemaking so that we can continue to answer those types of questions and build on the MPCA having the authority to look at those types of questions and then take enforcement action when necessary. So that is why I'm kind of pushing that right now, is to really get people involved in that process for odor rulemaking. That will allow us to do just that. So, yes.
So the odor law was written in 2023, went into effect, was passed into law in May of 2023. It'd be good if all the people who signed up, if you could get the timeline for the rulemaking, which we provided you with money to do the rulemaking, so the process for involvement in the rulemaking. I have a question on permit. Does the particulate matter depend on what is being processed that day? So, for example, if you're doing poultry, you've got a lot of feathers, does that, then you have the fuel, you said you're going to change the fuel will be changed, but if you're doing, say, hog parts versus poultry, does that determine what you're getting out of the stack?
So the question is, does what is being processed at that time dictate what is being emitted? Okay.
Okay. So when we're writing permits, we rely on emission factors that are derived from looking at a variety of different facilities. Our understanding is that the emission factors that are used to develop the emissions for this permit don't distinguish between the types of things that you're talking about in terms of, do turkey feathers create different amounts of particulate than some other entity that's being processed. It doesn't differentiate that at that level.
As a follow-up, they're operating under a compliance agreement now because of a violation, is that correct?
The compliance, so the schedule of compliance that we currently have was developed because of the previous cooker that failed. A new cooker, basically, it's larger in size, but we capped that out of what the old cooker could do. And in turn, we said, all right, then a scrubber that would manage odor is going to be included in this permit that we typically wouldn't have authority on. So it was kind of it was a give and take, so to speak. But yeah, obviously, there's enhanced record keeping and reporting now through the schedule of compliance. Monthly, basically, that gives assurances that the facility, until a permit is issued, is still in compliance.
And if there were violations of the compliance agreement, then you could change the compliance agreement, correct?
Yes, and there would be penalties per day per violation.
What is the scrubber?
What was the question?
What is the scrubber?
What is the scrubber?
A scrubber is a type of control equipment where the emissions are kind of, if you just imagine a big tank or a cylinder, the emissions are put through there, and then there is almost like a shower of liquid that it passes through, and that interacts with the emissions. For odor scrubbers, they're kind of specifically tuned to hopefully capture nitrogen-based or sulfur-based odors, whereas the PM or particulate matter scrubbers are fine-tuned to reduce particulate matter emissions. So it is a type of control device, a pollution control device.
Does it, this shower scrubber that you described, does it have a name? Is it, it's not, I'm guessing because you said that it's a shower that these go through? It's not a thermal oxidizer,
That is a separate type of control equipment.
and they don't have that?
No, they do not have a thermal oxidizer.
So again, what is the name of this one that you just described?
The scrubber is just, it's either called a Venturi scrubber or just a scrubber. That's the name of the control device, the type of control device.
What year did the Minnesota PCA start working with Sanimax? Or working with when their equipment?
I'm not exactly sure. The Sanimax was purchased a previous entity called Van Hoven, probably in the 90s, maybe after that. I know that I worked on a permit for Van Hoven in the mid-90s. I believe it had a long history prior to that. So I think it's been around for a very long time. Does that help?
No, I'm just wondering with the current problems, wasn't that you learned of the issues that we were having in general about the orders? And when the one piece of equipment failed, you all intervened and said, we will give you a permit for the new equipment, but only if you also add this scrubber, because there's been a lot of community complaints about the odor.
That
And what year
occurred,
was that?
that would have been late summer, early fall of this past year, 2024.
Okay, but PCA, I'm assuming, knew about the complaints.
The odor
The
complaints?
but there was nothing you guys, there was nothing legally that could be done about it.
Yeah, so.
Permits and statutes.
Correct. So we would work with the city, saying, well, we knew that they have an odor ordinance, and we would refer those odor complaints to the city. So, moving forward, thought is, as we get our rules, we'll take that burden off the city, and the agency will enforce its odor requirements. Does that answer your question?
Yes, of course, I have follow-up questions for the city.
Oh, we have one over here. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the new technology, the new scrubbers. Is that the best technology available for odor control?
So the question is the new scrubber the best technology available for odor control?
Currently available,
The scrubber was what was required by the schedule of compliance, and it was decided upon when the schedule of compliance was made. So I didn't have a part in that, but I have looked into odor control a little bit on my own, and scrubbers are a viable method for controlling odors. But the problem with odor is so many things can cause odors that it makes it a little more difficult to control than particulate matter. There's a lot of research, a lot of very kind of cut and dry control technologies for particulate matter because it is a little bit more studied and a little bit easier to catch. So that's kind of the best answer I can give you. It should be a viable way to control odor at Sanimax.
Would you consider capping these emissions as part of the permitting process? Because, as you said, this is worst-case scenario, 24 hours a day, bad fuels and all of that. But there's nothing to say that in 2 years or 3 years, they don't turn into a 24-hour day operation. and that isn't something that, many people in the room really have control over. I don't know through the city zoning code, or if there's a conditional use permit on this particular business that can limit their hours of operation. But once this gets approved to these sort of potential expected levels, there's no way to really rein that back in. So how would we not attempt to kind of rein that in now?
So your question is,
I mean, if 23 or 11 tons of PM is good enough for their operations today, maybe 11.1 tons of PM is good enough for their operations tomorrow.
yeah, so the question is, would we consider capping? I just want to condense what you're saying there, kind of questions. Would we consider capping the emissions in the permit? I would say that is another great example to put into the public comment period for consideration.
Not public comments tonight.
So tonight, we're here to answer questions, but to be part of the official record, it needs to go through the comment process. So we're taking notes tonight, but what we're taking notes on is not, we're mentally making notes of what we're discussing, but to be an official part of that record, it has to go through our comment process. And that is a great example of what you can put into the comment for consideration. Yeah. Yes?
What creates the odor? Is it the particulates? The science is a little bit fuzzy to me.
I don't think I'm going to give you a real satisfactory answer. A lot of things can cause odor. My supposition is that the odors are caused by organic decay in part, because that's the kind of business that Sanimax is in. And I would not necessarily associate that directly with particulate, although maybe it's carried that way in part. I don't know.
I did have a question to follow up on hers about
Yeah.
the permitting process. I, at one point, understood that when you do modeling like this, and the modeling is under the federal or state limit, you're kind of obligated to give the permit as an agency, because it meets the standards. So then, just kind of as a follow-up,
Sure.
is then, how did you come up with these other conditions?
Do you want to answer it, or do you want me to try to answer it?
Which conditions specifically?
The one with the fuel, the one that you're giving the new public comment period on, the fuel use, and the other one.
Maybe you want to go to the slide that had their proposed permit amendment information on it.
Yeah, the fuel and,
Did I go by it?
Yeah, go back 2 slides.
To the other one.
and that you cannot use refined animal fat or vegetable oil as a fuel.
So the way that we evaluate those potential emissions is they're based on two general things. One is, what is the physical capacity of the equipment? And related to that, what are the emissions that derive from that? And then what are the permit conditions that constrain the operations of well? So what we see on that bar chart is that reflects the mix of equipment that Sanimax operates. And then you asked about the removal of the fuel. So the different fuels have different profiles in terms of emissions. And by removing one of the fuels, we reduce the capacity, or the maximum emissions that facility can have. Does that get to your question?
And so then, since it's below the thresholds, are you obligated to give the permit?
We are, in a sense, yes, but I mean, we issue permits when there are no reasons not to issue the permit. So NACS, the National and Minnesota Ambient Air Quality Standards, if you're over that level, those thresholds, then we potentially have a reason to prevent you from getting a permit. This permit has a number of regulations. We believe they're in compliance with all those regulations, and we would not, we would issue the permit because we don't have a reason not to.
Right, yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
But you're doing nuance that I don't understand.
well,
That's okay, that's okay.
I've been in this business a very long time, and so I kind of choose my words real cautiously at times.
Yes, sir.
My understanding that they're essentially self-monitoring, that you don't have a site in Newport or in the west side where we occasionally get the wind change to understand neighbors' odor problems.
Yes, on many items, facilities self-report. I'm not clear if you're asking about like monitored air quality.
Yes, exactly what I'm asking.
So one of the reasons that we require sources to model at times is because we don't have monitors every place, and what a monitor reads is not just the emissions from one facility, but from the entire area. So, you have influences from traffic, you have influences from Flint Hills probably, and you have influences from Sanimax. And so if you stick up a monitor, you would see a certain concentration, and you'd say, okay, are they, even if are they meeting the ambient air quality standards, yes or no? And what we do when we model is we attempt to replicate that analysis that you would get with a monitor, because we don't have the means to put monitors everywhere. The self-reporting is more on what are the emissions that are coming from the site itself? How much are they processing? What does that mean in terms of emissions? That kind of thing. So the ambient monitoring and the self-reporting are kind of different things.
Yes, sir.
Follow up on that. Last year, we wrote into law and authorized stationary air monitoring equipment to be set up in Newport and on the east side of St. Paul, in Minneapolis, and in Rochester.
Is the deadline for those to be installed?
Update with the status.
Oh, yes. Hi, folks. I'm Courtney Allers-Nelson, Director at the Pollution Control Agency. So the placement of monitors is done by another division. So I have some information, but I will tell you there might be even more updated information than what I'm about to share. But Representative Hanson is correct. Since the conclusion of the last legislative session, I know our partners in a separate division have been looking for these sites at which they can place these new monitors. A big part of what they do is have to find the right location. They have to make sure that they have access to that property. Sometimes we have to put leases in place. We have to make sure that there's a power source. So it does oftentimes take time. So for the two, as of the 10th of January, this is the update that I have for Newport. It looks like they're in communication with the Newport Elementary. They have been working with the Washington County School District, and at that time we were still waiting for there was some back and forth about whether that school could be used. And if they do agree to host our monitor, then we hope to have a lease by as early as March 1st. So then the monitor will be placed shortly thereafter. So sometimes the logistics, just take a little bit of time, but then, was there another one representative? So I've got, is that St. Paul Brass? Oh, Northern Iron. Yes, thank you, okay. So there is a second site, it's similar timeline. So again, discussions with the property owner and looking to acquire a lease. We're hoping in that case that we could even use the site that we previously used, or we might require amending the lease, but this was the conversation in early January. And it seems like they think if all goes well, they could have that updated lease executed by March 1. So again, similar timeframe for placement of that ambient air monitor. Who is the placement? I don't have like an address, I apologize, but I'm looking at you. Is it, how close to Northern Iron is it? That's another
in the
facility.
facility.
Yes, it is.
So if it's near the TSP monitor that we currently have, it would be kind of south and east of Northern Iron, like within a block.
Okay.
It's the same areas that TSP. Total suspended particulate, sorry, speaking jargon.
So for the purpose of the recording, I'm going to summarize that real quick here, because for people that will be able to watch this later, there was a question regarding the stationary monitoring of air, and those locations are currently being identified by the MPCA, and they're looking at contracts and being able to put them on specific locations, and it is just a matter of setting up locations that have power and the resources to be able to do that, and then putting contracts into place. That's a real short summary of the conversation that just occurred. So it is something that the MPCA is actively working on. Check the time here. So we've got about 8 more minutes to answer any additional questions that you have. We will stick around and have any additional discussions that you want to have, but we do have about 8 more minutes for any additional questions.
Are all polluting companies allowed just self-monitor? Is that like a standard through the PCA? You just rely on their self-monitoring?
There are a number of, you asked a question about whether sources self-report. And by and large, we rely on self-reporting for a lot of our compliance. There are other things other requirements that we have. We have stack test requirements, which are usually fulfilled by third parties that are hired by facilities. Corey, do you want to talk about enforcement?
Yeah, so you mentioned the stack testing, so that's when a company would hire a third party to actually go and put probes in the stack to measure it, and that's probably the best data that we can get, and like, it's a snapshot in time.
Is that happening at Sanimax?
Yes, it is. Yep. Actually, we're reviewing a stack test report right now. There's other ways, there's continuous emission monitors. That's a little bit more sophisticated. Not all facilities have the capability to do that. But as Courtney mentioned, the cornerstone of a lot of environmental programs is self-reporting. What we're here to do is to verify that that self-reporting is being done correctly, it's being submitted timely, and it's accurate. We can't be everywhere, unfortunately, all the time. There's a lot of permitted facilities in Minnesota, and
So when you said accurate, so how is that determined, the accuracy?
so there are a lot of the equipment that we're looking at. It has to be calibrated to make sure that the reading is actually, if it's supposed to be at 10, that it's actually there at 10, and things, can sway one way or another. So that's one of them. Just the maintenance is another, and that's our best bet at ensuring that the control equipment is working properly. I don't think I answered your question.
Oh, that's okay, I haven't had many questions answered tonight anyway.
Well, we can chat too after.
Yeah, we'll certainly stick around and try to hone in on some of your questions afterwards. Yes, ma'am.
Who owns Sanimax?
As far as I know, Sanimax is a corporation out of Green Bay. That's as much as I know about it. Do you know anything more? Okay.
Isn't their parent company out of Canada?
Montreal.
Montreal, out of Montreal, yes. Okay, so we're right at time. So I'm going to give one more plug for people to please sign up for our rulemaking. It would greatly assist the MPCA in moving forward with giving us those authorities. So I will also put back up on the screen that, let's see if I went the right way here. I'll put up the QR code again for how to make comments. And then, again, we'll stick around afterward and we can provide our contact information specifically for Miles and myself. If you have any additional questions, then we'll be working on any of these questions that we just didn't have answers to tonight. We'll start working on getting those together. And then we will also put out information, again, when that second proposed permit is available and when that open comment period will start. So, okay.
So just one other comment, but
Yep.
when we came in, we signed up, we had our names and our email addresses.
Yeah.
Are you going to